Emily's scream cut through the silence of the house like broken glass. Her small hands gripped the wooden railing, knuckles turning white as she watched her brother Daniel tumble down the staircase. The thud of his body echoed through the hallway, sharp and unforgiving. And when he finally hit the bottom step, he groaned in pain, clutching his side. At the top of the stairs stood Vanessa, her stepmother, her face a mask of icy calm. She didn't look shocked or apologetic. She looked satisfied. Emily's heart pounded so violently she thought it might burst out of her chest. "Don't you dare say a word," Vanessa hissed, her voice low enough so only Emily could hear. Her perfectly manicured nails gripped the banister, a silent reminder of the power she held inside that house. Emily wanted to rush down the stairs to Daniel, to help him up, to make sure he was breathing okay, but her legs refused to move. Fear glued her to the spot. Daniel tried to push himself up, wincing with every movement. He glanced up at his little sister, his eyes wide but filled with a quiet plea for her not to intervene. Emily's young mind struggled to understand how the woman who smiled so warmly in front of others could be so cruel when no one else was watching. Vanessa wasn't just strict, she was dangerous. The sound of a car door shutting outside made everyone freeze. Richard, Emily's father, was home from work. His heavy footsteps approached the door, followed by the familiar jingle of his keys. Emily's breath caught. Maybe this time he would see. Maybe this time he would believe her. The front door opened, and Richard stepped inside. His tie loosened, his face tired from another long day at the office. He looked up at the staircase just as Daniel struggled to stand, still hunched over in pain. His eyes flicked to Vanessa, then to Emily, then back to Daniel. For a moment, silence hung in the air, thick and suffocating. "What happened here?" Richard asked, his voice firm but weary. Vanessa moved quickly, her tone instantly sweet, her eyes softening as if she were a concerned mother. "Daniel tripped," she said smoothly. "He wasn't paying attention and he slipped. I told him not to run in the house." Emily's mouth opened to speak, but the look Vanessa shot her froze her in place. It was a warning, sharp as a blade. She lowered her gaze to the floor, biting her lip so hard it almost bled. Richard sighed, rubbing the back of his neck. "Daniel, you've got to be more careful. Those stairs are steep." His voice lacked suspicion, only carrying the fatigue of a man who wanted peace in his home. Daniel nodded silently, swallowing his pain. Emily could see the redness in his eyes, the fight to hold back tears. Her chest tightened with helpless anger. Vanessa's arm slid around Richard's, pulling him gently toward the kitchen. "Dinner's almost ready. Let's sit down before it gets cold," she said warmly. And just like that, the moment was gone. Richard followed her, leaving Emily at the top of the stairs, trembling, while Daniel limped toward his room, each step heavy with the weight of what had just happened. Emily stood frozen, her body buzzing with confusion and fear. She wanted to scream the truth, to force her father to listen, but she was only 8. How could she find the courage when every attempt seemed to vanish under Vanessa's shadow? Her young heart already knew the answer. This was not an accident, and it would not be the last time. Before the story continues, don't forget to subscribe for more powerful stories like this, ones that show the strength hidden even in the smallest voices. That night, as Emily lay awake in her room, the sound of Daniel's muffled sobs filtered through the thin walls. She clutched her blanket, whispering to herself, "I won't let her win. Somehow I'll protect him." The promise hung in the air, fragile yet unbreakable, even if Emily didn't yet know how she would keep it. But in the silence of that house, beneath the weight of Vanessa's control and her father's silence, the first spark of defiance was born. Morning sunlight filtered through the blinds, casting pale stripes across Emily's bedroom floor. She woke early, her stomach in knots, the memory of last night replaying in her head. The sound of Daniel's body hitting the stairs still echoed inside her ears. She slipped out of bed, tiptoeing to her brother's room. When she pushed the door open, Daniel was sitting on the edge of his bed, his shoulders slumped. His pajama shirt was wrinkled and his hand pressed against his ribs. Emily noticed the way he winced when he shifted slightly. "Danny?" Her voice was soft, hesitant. "Are you okay?" Daniel looked up, his eyes tired, but he forced a faint smile for her sake. I'll be fine. Don't worry about me. Emily stepped closer, lowering her voice. She pushed you. I saw it. Why don't you tell Dad? Daniel shook his head quickly. He won't believe us. You saw how he looked yesterday. He thinks I just fell. He hesitated, his jaw tightening. If we say something, it'll only get worse. Emily's chest ached. She wanted to argue, but Daniel's fear weighed on her. He was older, but in that moment he seemed so small. She sat beside him, her tiny hand resting gently on his arm. Downstairs, the clatter of pans and Vanessa's cheerful humming drifted through the air, a sound so normal it made Emily's skin crawl. How could someone act so sweet after being so cruel? When breakfast was served, Vanessa's smile stretched wide, her eyes sparkling as she placed plates on the table. Richard sat at the head, reading emails on his phone, oblivious to the silent tension between the children. "Eat up," Vanessa said brightly. "Big day ahead." Daniel lowered himself carefully into his chair, moving slower than usual. Emily watched him struggle to sit without showing pain. She glanced at her father, waiting, hoping he would notice, but Richard's eyes never left his screen. Vanessa's gaze flicked toward Emily, a flash of steel behind her smile. "You were up late, weren't you, Emily? You know you need your rest." Emily swallowed hard, keeping her head down. "Yes, ma'am." After breakfast, Daniel headed upstairs to change for school. Emily followed, determined not to let him brush her off again. In the privacy of his room, she whispered, "Show me." He froze. "No. Please," she insisted. "I need to know." Reluctantly, Daniel lifted his shirt. Emily gasped, covering her mouth. Dark bruises spread across his side, ugly shades of purple and blue. She reached out but pulled her hand back, afraid to cause him pain. Daniel quickly lowered his shirt. "It doesn't matter, they'll fade." Tears stung Emily's eyes, but she blinked them away. "It does matter." "It's not fair, you don't deserve this." He gave a small, bitter laugh. "Life isn't fair, Em, you just have to deal with it." Her fists clenched at her sides. She wanted to scream, but she knew Vanessa might hear. Someday, Dad will see. He has to. Daniel didn't answer. He picked up his backpack, wincing as he swung it over one shoulder. His silence hurt Emily more than his words. On the bus ride to school, Emily stared out the window, the world passing in a blur. Children laughed and talked around her, but their voices felt distant, unreal. Her mind replayed Vanessa's warning, "Don't you dare say a word." Emily hugged her backpack close, whispering to herself, "I'll find a way." She didn't know how yet, but the determination burned quietly inside her. When the bus pulled up to the school, Daniel walked ahead, shoulders stiff. Emily followed, feeling both protective and powerless. She glanced at the building rising before her, hoping someone, anyone, would notice what she couldn't say out loud. And as the morning bell rang, Emily carried with her the weight of a secret too heavy for an 8-year-old's heart, a secret that refused to stay hidden forever. The schoolyard buzzed with life that morning, kids running, laughing, and shouting across the playground. Emily stepped off the bus and felt the shift in the air. School was different from home. The weight pressing down on her chest didn't disappear, but here at least it loosened. She clutched her backpack straps and walked toward her classroom, her eyes darting to Daniel, who moved slower than usual. Mrs. Johnson, Emily's third-grade teacher, stood at the classroom door, greeting each child with her usual warm smile. When Emily approached, Mrs. Johnson tilted her head, her brow furrowing ever so slightly. "Good morning, Emily," she said softly. "Good morning," Emily replied, forcing a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. She slipped inside quickly, hoping not to be questioned. During reading time, Emily couldn't focus. The words on the page blurred as her mind wandered back to the sight of Daniel's bruises. Her pencil tapped against her desk until Mrs. Johnson crouched beside her. "Everything okay, sweetheart?" the teacher asked gently. Emily hesitated, chewing her lip. The words almost escaped her throat, but fear clamped them down. "I'm just tired," she whispered. Mrs. Johnson studied her a moment longer, then nodded. "All right. But remember, you can always talk to me." Across the hall, Daniel sat in gym class, moving stiffly as his classmates ran laps. Coach Miller blew his whistle, calling him over. "Dan, everything all right? You're looking a little off today." Daniel shrugged, keeping his eyes down. "I'm fine, Coach." But when he stretched for the next drill, a sharp pain crossed his face. Miller noticed. "You sure? Looks like you're hurting." "I just tripped yesterday," Daniel muttered quickly, echoing the excuse Vanessa had fed their father. The coach nodded, but didn't seem convinced. "Take it easy today. Don't push yourself." By lunchtime, Emily and Daniel sat at their usual table. Emily picked at her sandwich, her eyes locked on her brother. "He saw it, didn't he?" she asked quietly. "Who?" Daniel asked. "Your coach. He knows something's wrong." Daniel shook his head. "Doesn't matter. Nobody will believe it." Emily lowered her voice, leaning closer. "But what if someone does? What if Mrs. Johnson or your coach could help us?" Daniel frowned. "Stop it, Em. Don't tell anyone. It'll just make things worse." Emily's heart sank, but she nodded, not wanting to push him further. She hated the way fear dictated everything. Later that afternoon, while Emily worked on a drawing assignment, Mrs. Johnson paused beside her desk again. The paper showed two figures holding hands under a dark sky, their faces drawn with big, sad eyes. "That's a powerful picture," Mrs. Johnson said softly. "Who are they?" Emily froze, her crayon hovering above the page. "Just people," she said quickly. Mrs. Johnson placed a gentle hand on her shoulder. "You're very expressive. If you ever want to talk about your drawings, or anything else, I'm here." Emily nodded, but her throat felt tight. She wanted to spill everything, to tell this kind woman about the nights filled with whispers and bruises. But Vanessa's warning echoed inside her head like a curse. The final bell rang, and children rushed out into the bright afternoon sun. Emily followed Daniel to the bus, her heart heavy. She had hoped school would feel like freedom, a place where the truth could breathe, but fear followed them here too. Still, something about Mrs. Johnson's eyes lingered in her mind. They weren't just watchful, they were caring, and Emily clung to that fragile hope. As she climbed onto the bus, Emily whispered to herself, "Someone will see. They have to." And though Daniel remained quiet, staring out the window, the seed of possibility had been planted inside Emily's heart. For the first time, she wondered if silence wasn't the only option. The atmosphere in the house shifted over the next few days. Vanessa's voice grew sharper, her rules stricter. Emily noticed it first, how the smallest things seemed to set her stepmother off. A toy left on the carpet, a dish not rinsed perfectly, even the sound of laughter at the wrong time became reasons for punishment. "Shoes by the door, not in the hallway," Vanessa snapped one evening, glaring at Daniel, who had kicked his sneakers aside after limping home from school. "They're just shoes," Emily whispered, her voice trembling. Vanessa's head whipped toward her. "What did you say?" Emily swallowed hard, shrinking under her gaze. "Nothing, Mum." "That's what I thought," Vanessa said coldly, before turning back to the kitchen. Richard sat at the table sipping his coffee, pretending to scroll through his phone. His shoulders tensed, but he didn't intervene. Emily's stomach twisted. He heard, he saw, yet he said nothing. In public, Vanessa played her part flawlessly. At the grocery store, she chatted kindly with the cashier, praising Emily for helping carry the basket. At church on Sunday, she clasped Richard's arm, smiling as she greeted neighbors, painting herself as the perfect stepmother. No one looking in would ever guess what life inside that house really was. Emily began to understand the game Vanessa played. In front of others, she was nurturing, graceful, admired. But behind closed doors, her control tightened like a vice. At dinner one night, Richard complimented the roast she had prepared. "This is great, Vanessa." Her eyes softened immediately, her voice syrupy. "Thank you, darling. I do try my best for this family." But when Daniel reached for an extra roll without asking, her hand shot out, gripping his wrist. "Did you ask permission?" she said quietly, a venom hidden beneath her sweet tone. Daniel froze, his face flushing. "No, ma'am." "Then you wait," she said, releasing him with a smile as though nothing had happened. Richard glanced up briefly, then lowered his eyes back to his plate. Emily pushed her food around, her appetite gone. She could feel Daniel's humiliation from across the table. She wanted to scream at her father, to make him see, but the words remained locked inside her chest. Later that night, Emily overheard Vanessa speaking to Richard in the living room. Her voice carried through the vent into Emily's bedroom. "These children need structure," Vanessa said firmly. "They're too soft. Daniel, especially. He needs discipline. You let them get away with too much." Richard's sigh followed. "I don't want constant conflict, Vanessa. They've already been through a lot." "And that's exactly why they need me," she replied. "You can't raise them alone. They need a strong hand." Emily hugged her pillow tightly, her heart pounding. Every word confirmed what she already knew. Vanessa wasn't just strict. She was shaping their lives to fit her control, bending her father's judgment with carefully chosen words. The next morning, Vanessa assigned new chores. Daniel was to mow the lawn after school, despite the bruises still healing on his side. Emily was ordered to fold laundry and clean the bathroom, tasks far heavier than what she'd ever done before. "Responsibility builds character," Vanessa said, her smile fixed, but her eyes gleaming with satisfaction. Emily looked at her brother, who grimaced as he agreed silently. The weight of Vanessa's rules pressed harder on their young shoulders, and their father's silence only made it worse. As Emily scrubbed the bathroom tiles that afternoon, her small hands raw from the cleaner, she whispered to herself, "She can't win forever. Someone has to see through her." Her words faded into the empty room, but her determination burned brighter than before. Even in the face of Vanessa's growing control, a quiet fire began to take root inside her heart. The house was quiet, the kind of stillness that made every creak of the floor feel louder. Emily sat on her bed, knees drawn up to her chest, her heart thudding in rhythm with the clock on the wall. She stared at the small notebook tucked under her pillow, the one she had bought at the school book fair months ago. Its cover was faded pink with little stars, but inside it was empty, waiting. She pulled it out slowly, almost afraid of what she was about to do. Her hand trembled as she picked up a pencil. She hesitated, biting her lip, before pressing the tip to the page. The first words were shaky, written in uneven letters. She pushed Daniel down the stairs. "Dad didn't believe us." Emily paused, staring at the sentence. It looked too heavy, too grown up for her small handwriting. But she kept going, pouring her thoughts onto the paper. The fear she felt when Vanessa's eyes locked on hers, the way Daniel winced when he moved, the silence that pressed down on them like a blanket they couldn't escape from. Tears blurred her vision, but she didn't stop writing. For the first time, she felt like her voice mattered, even if it was only inside these pages. A knock on her door made her jump. She slammed the notebook shut and shoved it under her pillow. "Come in," she called, her voice cracking. Daniel peeked his head in. "You okay?" Emily wiped her cheeks quickly. "Yeah, just thinking." He stepped inside, his movements still stiff from the bruises. Sitting beside her, he gave her a tired smile. "You don't have to worry so much, Em." "I'm fine." "You're not fine," she whispered fiercely. "You hurt every time you walk." Emily cut herself off, lowering her voice even more. "She's going to keep doing it." Daniel looked away, his silence an answer in itself. Emily's hands clenched in her lap. She wanted to tell him about the notebook, about the words she had written, but fear kept her quiet. What if he told her to stop? What if Vanessa found out? Instead, she leaned against him, her small frame pressing into his side carefully. "I'll protect you," she murmured. Daniel chuckled softly, though it sounded broken. "You're 8. I'm supposed to protect you." Emily lifted her chin, determination flashing in her eyes. "Doesn't matter. I will anyway." That night, after everyone went to bed, Emily crept out of her room. She padded down the hall, the floorboards groaning under her tiny feet. She stopped at Daniel's door, cracked open just enough for her to see him asleep, curled tightly on his side. His face was pale in the moonlight, and even in sleep, his brow furrowed with discomfort. She wanted to shake him awake, to tell him about the diary, to promise again that she wouldn't let Vanessa win. But she stayed silent, whispering instead, "I'll find a way." Back in her room, she pulled the notebook out again. She wrote until her eyelids grew heavy, documenting everything she remembered, the threats, the rules, the bruises. Each word felt like a stone lifted from her chest, even as fear pressed harder around her. By the time she closed the notebook, her small hand was cramped from writing, but her heart felt lighter. She slid it back under her pillow, hiding it like a treasure. To her, it wasn't just paper. It was proof. Proof that she wasn't imagining things. Proof that one day someone might believe her. As she drifted off to sleep, Emily clutched the pillow tight, comforted by the secret beneath it. For the first time in weeks, she felt a spark of courage growing inside her. Small, fragile, but alive. And though she didn't know how, she sensed that the pages she filled would one day become her shield. The late afternoon sun dipped low, painting the suburban street in shades of gold. Emily sat on the front steps, hugging her knees, her eyes tracing the cracks on the sidewalk. Daniel was inside, lying down after finishing his chores, his face pale and strained from the effort of mowing the lawn. Across the street, Mrs. Ramirez watered her flower beds, her wide-brimmed hat shading her from the sun. She was the kind of neighbor who always waved when she saw the children, always asked how school was going. Today, when she spotted Emily sitting alone, she set the hose aside and crossed over. "Hi, sweetheart," Mrs. Ramirez greeted warmly. "You look like you've had a long day." Emily forced a small smile. "Hi, Mrs. Ramirez." The older woman crouched slightly to meet her eyes. "How's school and your brother? Haven't seen him outside playing much lately." Emily's throat tightened. She wanted to answer, wanted to tell her everything, but Vanessa's warning rang in her ears. She lowered her gaze, her voice barely above a whisper. "He's just tired." Mrs. Ramirez studied her carefully, her kind eyes searching for the truth. "Well, that's unusual for Daniel. He's always been such an energetic boy." The sound of the front door opening made Emily flinch. Vanessa stepped outside, her smile wide and polished. "Oh, Mrs. Ramirez, how nice to see you," she said brightly. "Hello, Vanessa," the neighbor replied, standing up straighter. "I was just saying hi to Emily." She looked a little down. Vanessa let out a light laugh, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "Kids, you know, they pout when they don't get their way." "She'll be fine." Emily's chest tightened. She kept her eyes glued to the ground, afraid to betray herself with even the smallest glance. "Well," Mrs. Ramirez said slowly, "if either of you kids ever want to come over for cookies or just to chat, my door is always open." "Thank you, that's so kind," Vanessa replied smoothly, her voice laced with charm. "But we're managing just fine." "Aren't we, Emily?" Emily forced herself to nod, though every part of her wanted to scream no. After Mrs. Ramirez walked back to her yard, Vanessa leaned down close to Emily's ear, her voice sharp and cold. "Remember what I told you? Not a word. Do you understand?" Emily nodded quickly, her stomach twisting with fear. That night, Emily lay awake, staring at the ceiling. The memory of Mrs. Ramirez's eyes lingered, gentle, questioning, almost protective. For a moment, Emily had felt seen, like someone had noticed the storm she and Daniel were trapped in. But the hope faded as Vanessa's words echoed inside her mind. Telling anyone could mean more pain for Daniel, more threats whispered in the dark. The next day, as Emily walked to the bus stop, Mrs. Ramirez waved again. Emily lifted her hand in return, a tiny gesture, but inside her heart it felt bigger. It was proof that someone cared enough to look closer, even if Emily wasn't ready to speak. At school, she thought about the neighbor's offer, cookies, a safe place to talk. She imagined sitting at Mrs. Ramirez's kitchen table, the smell of sugar and cinnamon in the air, finally telling someone everything. The thought warmed her, though fear still kept her silent. When she came home that afternoon, Daniel was on the couch, his eyes closed. He looked exhausted, his body still recovering. Emily sat beside him, whispering, "Maybe someone will help us. Maybe soon." Daniel stirred but didn't answer. Emily touched his hand gently, holding on to the small flicker of hope she had felt outside. Mrs. Ramirez had noticed, and that was enough to keep Emily's determination alive, even if the danger still surrounded them inside their own home. Richard sat in his office cubicle long after most of his co-workers had gone home, staring at the glow of his computer screen. His tie was loosened and a half-empty cup of coffee had gone cold beside him. He rubbed his temples, trying to push away the stress of looming deadlines. Lately, he found himself dreading going home almost as much as staying late at work. When he finally pulled into the driveway, the house looked peaceful from the outside. The porch light glowed warmly. The lawn was freshly mowed and flower pots sat neatly arranged by the door. From a distance it resembled the picture of a happy family. Richard wanted desperately to believe that was true. Inside, Vanessa greeted him with her usual bright smile. "You're home late again," she said, kissing his cheek. "I kept your dinner warm." "Thanks," Richard replied, setting down his briefcase. His eyes drifted toward the living room, where Emily sat quietly with a book. Daniel was nowhere in sight. "Where's your brother?" Richard asked. "Upstairs," Emily murmured. "He's resting." Vanessa stepped in quickly. "He's been moody lately. You know how pre-teens get lazy, dramatic. I've been trying to teach him some responsibility, but he resists every step of the way." Richard frowned. "He's been tired a lot. Maybe he's sick." Vanessa's laugh was light, practiced. "Sick?" "Hardly. He's just stubborn. Don't let him fool you with his little sulking routine." Emily's fingers tightened on her book. She wanted to shout that Daniel wasn't faking, that his bruises weren't from clumsiness, but Vanessa's sharp glance silenced her. Later, at dinner, Richard noticed how carefully Daniel moved in his chair. He pushed food around his plate more than he ate. "You all right, son?" Richard asked gently. Daniel looked up, startled, then quickly nodded. "Yes, sir, just not that hungry." Vanessa sighed, placing a hand on Richard's arm. "See what I mean? Always making excuses. He didn't finish his chores today either. I had to remind him twice." Richard studied his son, torn between suspicion and exhaustion. He wanted to believe Daniel, but Vanessa's steady confidence wrapped around his doubts like a net. She always sounded so reasonable, so patient. What if she was right? After dinner, Richard stepped outside with Vanessa, while Emily cleared the table. The cool evening air smelled of freshly cut grass. Vanessa leaned against him, her voice low. "You need to back me up more," she said smoothly. "If the kids see you questioning me, they'll never respect me. Especially Emily. She's been testing boundaries, making up stories to get attention." Richard stiffened. "Stories?" "She claimed I was too hard on Daniel," Vanessa said, with a small, dismissive laugh. "Honestly, it's absurd. But she's young and kids exaggerate. Don't let her manipulate you." Richard frowned, uneasy. Emily wasn't a liar. She was sensitive, yes, but she didn't make things up. Still, with work weighing on him and Vanessa's unwavering tone, he pushed the doubt aside. When he went back inside, Emily looked up at him with wide eyes, as if waiting for him to say something, anything. He offered a tired smile instead. "Bedtime soon, okay?" She nodded silently, disappointment pressing down on her small frame. Upstairs, Daniel sat on his bed, staring at the floor. Richard knocked lightly before entering. "You sure you're okay?" he asked. Daniel forced a smile. "I'm fine, Dad, really." Richard hesitated, then ruffled his son's hair before leaving. As he closed the door, guilt gnawed at him, but he told himself it was nothing. Kids bounced back. Vanessa just wanted discipline in the house. Yet as he lay in bed that night, listening to the steady breathing beside him, Richard couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. Still, he buried it deep, convincing himself silence was the safer choice. The atmosphere inside the house thickened as summer days dragged on. Emily noticed how Vanessa's patience seemed to wear thinner with each passing week. Small mistakes that once earned only a sharp look now brought scolding words, extra chores, or icy silence that lingered like a shadow over the dinner table. One afternoon, Emily was drawing quietly at the kitchen table when Daniel shuffled in from outside, sweat dripping down his temples. He had been forced to trim the hedges despite the soreness still clinging to his body. His shirt clung to him, and his movements were stiff. "You missed a spot," Vanessa said curtly. not even looking up from the magazine in her hands. Daniel's shoulders slumped. "I'll fix it later." Her eyes lifted sharply. "No, you'll fix it now. Laziness has no place in this house." Emily's pencil snapped in her hand. She wanted to speak up, to defend him, but Daniel gave her a subtle shake of his head. The message was clear. Stay quiet. That evening, Emily overheard Vanessa in the living room, her voice sweet but firm as she spoke to Richard. "They're too undisciplined. If you don't let me handle things, they'll grow up spoiled and ungrateful." Richard sighed, his voice weary. "I just don't want the house filled with tension all the time." "Tension?" Vanessa laughed lightly. "It's called structure. Maybe it feels uncomfortable, but children need boundaries." Emily, hiding around the corner, felt her stomach twist. Vanessa always knew how to bend her father's doubts into something that sounded reasonable. As the days stretched on, the rules multiplied. Television was restricted, laughter after dinner was forbidden, and doors had to remain slightly open at all times. Emily began to feel like even breathing too loudly might bring punishment. Daniel changed too. His once playful spirit dimmed. He no longer teased her the way he used to, no longer asked to shoot hoops in the driveway or ride bikes down the street. Instead, he retreated to his room, quiet and withdrawn. One evening, Emily pushed his door open, finding him sitting on the edge of his bed, staring blankly at the wall. "Danny," she whispered, stepping inside, "do you want to play a board game?" He shook his head without looking at her. "Not tonight." "You always say that now," she murmured, her voice cracking. "You don't even smile anymore." Daniel finally turned, his eyes heavy with sadness. "It's easier if I don't feel anything. Then it doesn't hurt as much." Emily's chest tightened. "But you can't stop feeling forever." He forced a faint smile. "Maybe I can." Her throat ached with unshed tears. She wanted to scream at him, to fight, to stand tall, but she could see how heavy the weight had become. And she knew part of that weight was the silence their father kept, a silence that gave Vanessa more room to twist their lives. That night, while brushing her teeth, Emily heard voices downstairs. She leaned closer to the vent, straining to listen. "She's too soft," Vanessa was saying. "Emily needs to be tougher. She cries at everything." "If you don't let me guide her, she'll grow up weak." Richard muttered something she couldn't catch. His voice was low, uncertain. Emily pulled back from the vent, her small fists trembling. It wasn't just Daniel anymore. Vanessa was setting her sights on her, too. Lying awake later, Emily stared at the shadows stretching across her ceiling. The house felt like a trap tightening around them, each day shrinking the space where they could feel safe. But deep inside, even through her fear, a quiet defiance flickered. She whispered into the dark, "She won't take us both. I won't let her." The storm came without warning. Heavy clouds gathered over the neighborhood, thunder rolling in the distance as rain pelted the windows. Inside the house, tension brewed thicker than the weather outside. Daniel had just finished stacking firewood by the garage, his body aching with each movement. His shirt clung to him, damp with sweat and rain. Emily watched from the window, her stomach twisting. She could see how exhausted he was, how every step seemed heavier than the last. When he came inside, dripping and shivering, Vanessa stood waiting in the hallway, arms crossed. "You call that finished?" she said sharply. Daniel blinked, confused. "I brought in all the wood." "You left mud by the door," she snapped. "Do it again, and do it properly." He stiffened, his jaw clenching. "I'm tired." Her eyes narrowed. "Excuse me?" "I said I'm tired," he repeated, his voice shaking but louder this time. Emily's heart skipped a beat. She could feel the air shift. The moment Daniel dared to talk back, even just a little, something dangerous awoke in Vanessa's eyes. Before Emily could react, Vanessa stepped forward and shoved Daniel hard against the staircase railing. He stumbled, gripping his ribs, and then she pushed again, this time sending him tumbling down the first few steps before he hit the landing with a heavy thud. "Daniel!" Emily screamed, rushing forward. Her voice cracked through the house, louder than she had ever shouted before. Richard's footsteps thundered from the living room. He froze at the sight. Daniel groaning on the floor, Emily sobbing beside him, Vanessa standing above with her arms folded tightly. What happened? Richard's voice was a mix of shock and disbelief. He slipped, Vanessa said instantly, her tone smooth, almost rehearsed. He wasn't careful. I told him to watch his step. Emily turned to her father, desperation flooding her. No, she pushed him. I saw it, she did it. Richard's eyes darted between his daughter, his wife, and his son lying injured on the floor. Doubt clouded his face. Emily, please. She's lying, Emily cried, her tiny hands gripping Daniel's arm. Dad, you have to believe me, please. Vanessa's voice sliced through the air, calm but firm. Richard, she's imagining things again. You know how she gets when she's upset. Don't let her turn you against me. Daniel tried to sit up, groaning in pain. Dad. His voice was weak, broken, but he didn't finish the sentence. Richard knelt beside him, panic flickering in his eyes. We'll get you upstairs. You'll be fine. He avoided looking at Emily, avoided the accusation hanging between them. Emily's chest heaved, tears streaming down her face. Why won't you listen? She whispered, her voice trembling. But her father didn't answer. He lifted Daniel carefully with Vanessa hovering close, her hand resting on his shoulder as if guiding him. Emily stood frozen, feeling the world collapse around her. Later that night, as the rain continued to hammer the windows, Emily lay awake, her fists clenched beneath the blanket. Her throat was raw from crying, but anger now burned hotter than fear. She had screamed the truth louder than ever, and still her father had chosen silence. Daniel lay in the next room, his body battered and spirit dimmed. Emily knew things couldn't stay the same. Something inside her shifted. If no one else would stand up for them, she would. For the first time, she wasn't just scared. She was furious, and that fury planted a new determination in her heart. Vanessa's lies would not go unchallenged forever. The morning after the fall carried a heavy silence. Richard had gone to work early, and Vanessa busied herself in the kitchen, humming softly as if nothing had happened. Emily lingered upstairs, sitting cross-legged on her bed, her pillow concealing the secret she had been protecting for weeks. She pulled the notebook out slowly, her small hands trembling as she flipped through the pages. The messy handwriting told the story of every bruise, every whispered threat, every time her father chose not to see. Each word made her heart pound, but it also gave her strength. The door creaked and Emily shoved the diary back under the pillow, her breath catching. Daniel stepped in quietly, moving stiffly from the pain in his ribs. "You okay?" he asked, his voice hoarse. Emily nodded quickly, but her eyes betrayed her nerves. Daniel frowned. "What were you hiding?" "Nothing," Emily said too fast. He limped closer, his gaze searching. Finally, with a gentle hand, he lifted the pillow. The notebook slipped into view. Emily froze, panic washing over her. "Em!" he whispered, picking it up carefully. "What is this?" She lunged forward. Please, don't read it!" But Daniel had already opened to the first page. His eyes moved slowly over the words. The room was silent except for the sound of his uneven breathing. Page after page, he read what his sister had been too afraid to say out loud. Finally, he looked up, his eyes glistening. "You wrote all of this?" Emily nodded, tears spilling down her cheeks. "I had to. I didn't know what else to do. If we don't tell someone, no one will ever believe us. But if they see this, maybe they will." Daniel sat heavily on the bed, clutching the notebook like it was something fragile. His voice shook. "You remembered everything, even stuff I thought you forgot." "I didn't forget," Emily whispered. "I never forget." For the first time in weeks, Daniel didn't look beaten down. He looked moved, almost hopeful. This could be proof," he said slowly. "If someone sees it, they'll have to believe us." "But what if she finds out?" Emily asked, fear rising in her voice. "She'll hurt us worse." Daniel placed the notebook back in her lap, his hand lingering on hers. "Then we don't let her find it. We keep it safe. And when the time's right, we show it to someone who will listen." Emily wiped her tears with the back of her hand. "Like who?" He hesitated. Maybe Mrs. Johnson or Coach Miller, they've both noticed things, they might help. Emily's heart pounded at the thought. The idea of sharing the diary terrified her, but deep inside she knew Daniel was right. "Promise me," she said quietly. "Promise me we'll do it together. I don't want to be alone when it happens." Daniel squeezed her hand. "I promise." The door downstairs slammed, Vanessa's voice floating up the staircase. "Kids, time for chores." Emily's stomach twisted, but this time fear didn't silence her completely. She tucked the diary into the back of her dresser drawer, hidden beneath old clothes. It felt safer there than under her pillow. Daniel glanced at her, determination flickering in his tired eyes. "She thinks she's in control, but she doesn't know what you've done. She doesn't know we're stronger than she thinks." Emily swallowed hard, her chest tightening with both dread and courage. For the first time, she and Daniel shared something their stepmother couldn't touch. A secret, a weapon of truth written in a child's uneven handwriting. As they walked downstairs together, Emily's small hand brushed against her brother's. The bruises were still there, the fear was still real, but the diary had changed something. It gave them a chance, however fragile, at being heard. The following week felt heavier than usual. Emily walked through the school halls with her backpack pulled tight to her shoulders, her mind never leaving the secret drawer where her diary now rested. Every step she took felt like she was carrying those pages with her. Daniel walked beside her, his movements stiff but steadier than before. They exchanged few words, but the promise they had made lingered between them like a quiet bond. In class, Emily found it harder to concentrate. Numbers and letters blurred on the chalkboard, while her thoughts tangled around the same questions. Who will believe us? When is the right time to tell? She tapped her pencil nervously until Mrs. Johnson's calm voice broke through. "Emily," the teacher said gently, crouching beside her desk. "You seem distracted again. Is everything okay?" Emily froze. For a second, she almost blurted it all out. Instead, she shook her head. "I'm fine." Mrs. Johnson studied her carefully, her kind eyes searching for cracks in the walls Emily had built. "You know you can always talk to me," she reminded softly. At lunch, Daniel sat quietly, eating little. His coach passed by the cafeteria, giving him a quick nod. Emily noticed how Coach Miller's eyes lingered on Daniel's hunched posture, the way he moved as if guarding his ribs. "Your coach is watching you," Emily whispered. Daniel sighed. "I know. He's been asking questions. I keep telling him I'm fine." "But you're not fine," Emily insisted, her voice sharp with frustration. "And he can see it." Daniel shook his head. "If we tell him, she'll find out. And you know what that means." Emily bit her lip, the taste of fear familiar now, yet the thought of staying silent made her chest ache even more. 2 days later, their fears were tested. A woman in a navy blazer arrived at school, holding a clipboard. Emily spotted her speaking with Mrs. Johnson outside the classroom door. The words Child Protective Services floated into Emily's ears, making her stomach drop. When the woman stepped inside, Emily's heart raced. The social worker smiled warmly, asking simple questions to the class about their favorite hobbies, blending in like any other visitor. But Emily knew why she was really there. After class, Mrs. Johnson called Emily aside. "This is Miss Carter," she said softly. "She just wants to get to know you a little. You don't have to be afraid." Emily's palms sweated as Miss Carter crouched to her level. "Hi, Emily. Your teacher says you're a very bright student. How's everything at home?" Emily's throat tightened. She wanted to scream the truth, to hand over her diary and beg for help. But the memory of Vanessa's threats flashed before her. Not a word. "I'm fine," Emily whispered, her eyes downcast. Miss Carter studied her carefully, then offered a kind smile. "If you ever feel like talking, I'll be back. You're not alone." The words settled in Emily's heart, a seed of comfort. Someone else cared. Someone else was watching. But when Emily returned home, Vanessa was already waiting. Her smile was too polished, her tone too sweet as she spoke to Richard. "The school sent someone today," she said with mock concern. "Apparently they think we need checking in. Isn't that ridiculous?" Richard frowned, uncertain. Why would they? Because Emily's been telling stories again, Vanessa interrupted smoothly. She's been exaggerating, making things sound worse than they are. I handled it, but honestly, it's embarrassing. Emily stood frozen in the hallway, her heart sinking. Vanessa had beaten them to it, twisting the truth before anyone else could see it clearly. Yet despite the setback, Emily held on to one thought, Ms. Carter's words. You're not alone. Even if Vanessa tried to bury the truth, Emily now knew that other eyes were watching, waiting for the chance to see past the lies. The following weekend carried a strange unease. The air in the house felt thick, as if every conversation tiptoed along the edge of something dangerous. Richard spent most of Saturday morning fixing a leaky faucet in the kitchen, his brow furrowed in concentration. Emily hovered nearby, her small hands nervously twisting the hem of her shirt. Across the street, Mrs. Ramirez watched from her porch. She noticed the children rarely played outside anymore, and their once bright laughter had vanished. That afternoon, she walked over with a plate of cookies, determined to check in. "Richard," she greeted, smiling politely when he answered the door. "I thought I'd bring something sweet for the kids." "That's very kind," Richard replied, surprised. "You didn't have to." Mrs. Ramirez lowered her voice, her eyes serious. "I've noticed Daniel limping, and Emily. She doesn't smile the way she used to. Is everything okay at home?" Richard's stomach tightened. "They're fine," he said quickly, though his tone lacked conviction. Before Mrs. Ramirez could press further, Vanessa appeared, her smile radiant. "What a lovely surprise," she chimed, taking the plate of cookies. "You're always so thoughtful." Mrs. Ramirez held Richard's gaze a moment longer before stepping back. "Well, if the kids ever need anything, they know where to find me." After she left, Richard turned to Vanessa. "Why would she say that?" "About the kids not being themselves." Vanessa rolled her eyes. "Because she's a nosy neighbor with nothing better to do. Honestly, Richard, people love to invent drama where there isn't any." Richard frowned, unease gnawing at him. But before he could respond, Emily stepped hesitantly into the kitchen. "Dad?" she whispered. Vanessa's eyes flicked to her, sharp as glass. "Emily, go finish your chores." Richard noticed the way Emily flinched, the way her small frame stiffened before she turned toward the hallway. Something inside him cracked. "Emily, wait," he said, his voice firmer than usual. Vanessa's smile faltered. "Richard, no," he cut in, surprising even himself. "I want to hear what she has to say." Emily froze, her eyes wide. Slowly she turned back, her hands trembling. "Dad," she whispered, "please believe me. She's not nice when you're not here. She hurts Daniel. She yells at us. It's not just us being dramatic." Richard's chest tightened. He looked at his daughter, her small face pale with fear yet desperate with honesty. Then his eyes shifted to Vanessa, who stood poised, her expression unreadable. "She's exaggerating again," Vanessa said smoothly, slipping into her practiced tone. "Kids make up stories when they don't get their way. You know that." Emily shook her head fiercely. "It's not a story. It's the truth." Richard's hands curled into fists at his sides. His mind raced. Mrs. Ramirez's concern, the bruises he had pretended not to notice, the tension that never seemed to leave the house. Pieces began to connect, but doubt still clung stubbornly. That evening, when Vanessa stepped out to make a phone call, Richard sat at the edge of Daniel's bed. His son stared at the ceiling, silent. "Daniel," Richard said quietly, "I need you to be honest with me. Has Vanessa hurt you?" Daniel's lips pressed into a thin line. For a long moment, silence filled the room. Finally, he whispered, "You wouldn't believe me if I said yes." The words pierced Richard's chest. "Of course I would," he said quickly. But even to his own ears, the assurance sounded weak. Daniel turned his head slowly, his eyes filled with exhaustion and a flicker of anger. "Then why haven't you yet?" Richard had no answer. His throat closed as guilt swallowed him whole. He left the room feeling smaller than ever, haunted by the truth his children had carried alone. Monday morning arrived heavy with clouds, the air thick and damp. Emily carried her backpack to school with unusual determination. Her diary rested inside, buried between her notebooks, its weight pressing against her like a heartbeat. Daniel had nodded silently when she slipped it into her bag, a silent agreement that today might be different. In class, Emily's hands shook as she pulled out her math book. The diary peeked from the edge of her bag, its pink cover like a secret begging to be heard. She stared at Mrs. Johnson at the front of the room, her kind smile steady as always. Emily knew this was the moment, but fear gnawed at her. When the bell rang for recess, Emily stayed behind. Her classmates' laughter faded down the hallway until the room grew quiet. She stood slowly, her small legs trembling as she walked to the teacher's desk. "Mrs. Johnson," she whispered. The teacher looked up, her expression instantly gentle. "Yes, Emily?" Emily fumbled with her bag, pulling out the diary with both hands. She placed it on the desk, her throat tight. "Can you read this, please?" "But not where she can find it." Mrs. Johnson's brow furrowed as she opened to the first page. Her eyes scanned the shaky handwriting, and with each line her face changed, confusion, concern, then sorrow. She closed the book gently, placing a hand over it. "Emily," she said softly, "thank you for trusting me. This is very brave of you." Emily's chest ached with both fear and relief. "You believe me?" Mrs. Johnson's voice was firm. "I do. And I promise, I'm going to make sure someone listens." That afternoon, Mrs. Johnson requested a meeting with Richard. He arrived at the school office, tie loosened, looking more tired than ever. When he saw the diary on the desk, his brow knit in confusion. "What's this?" he asked. Mrs. Johnson folded her hands. "It belongs to Emily. I need you to read it." Richard hesitated, then opened the diary. The words leapt from the pages, the fall down the stairs, the bruises, the whispered threats, the silence at the dinner table. Every line struck him like a blow. His face paled as he turned each page, his breathing shallow. When he reached the end, he set the diary down with shaking hands, his voice cracked. "She wrote all this." "Yes," Mrs. Johnson replied softly. "And none of it sounds like a child's fantasy. She's describing pain no 8-year-old should know." Richard pressed his palms to his eyes. I thought they were exaggerating. I wanted to believe things were normal. But reading this..." His words broke off, guilt heavy in his throat. Mrs. Johnson leaned forward, her tone steady. "Richard, your children need you to see the truth. If you keep looking away, you're leaving them alone with it." The weight of her words sank deep. Richard sat frozen, hearing Daniel's quiet accusation from nights ago. "Then why haven't you yet?" echo in his ears. When Emily entered the office to leave with him, her small eyes searched his face nervously. Richard knelt down, pulling her into his arms. "I read it," he whispered, his voice raw. "I'm so sorry, Emily. I should have believed you." Tears blurred her vision, but she clung to him tightly, finally feeling the crack in his silence. That night, Richard sat awake long after the children had gone to bed. The diary rested on his lap, its pages stained with his daughter's truth. For the first time, he couldn't hide behind work or fatigue. The lies Vanessa told, the control she wielded, the pain etched into Daniel's and Emily's young faces, all of it was undeniable now. And though fear churned inside him, Richard knew he couldn't remain silent any longer. The evening air felt heavy as Richard sat in the living room, Emily's diary open on his lap. The words stared back at him, raw and undeniable. Every sentence was a wound, every page a plea he had ignored for far too long. Upstairs, the house was quiet, Daniel resting, Emily curled under her blankets. But Richard's mind churned with noise. Vanessa entered, her heels clicking softly against the hardwood floor. She carried a glass of wine, her expression calm. "You're up late," she said smoothly, eyeing the diary in his hands. Richard's jaw tightened. "Did you know about this?" Her smile didn't falter. "Of course, Emily's been scribbling nonsense in that notebook for weeks. I told you she has an overactive imagination." "Nonsense?" His voice rose, breaking the silence. "She wrote about everything, every bruise, every fall, every time you—" He stopped himself, rage thick in his throat. Vanessa's eyes narrowed. "Careful, Richard. You sound like you're accusing me." "I'm not sounding like anything," he snapped. "I am accusing you. Emily's not making this up. And Daniel, God, I've seen him limping for weeks. I told myself it was clumsiness, that kids fall, but I knew. Deep down I knew." Vanessa set her glass down sharply. "So now you believe an 8-year-old's diary over me?" "Your wife?" "My daughter," Richard said firmly, his voice shaking, "is telling the truth. Something you've never done." For the first time, Vanessa's mask cracked. Her lips pressed into a thin line, her tone sharp. "If you turn against me, Richard, you'll regret it. Don't forget who keeps this household together." Richard stood, his fists trembling at his sides. "No. The kids keep this house alive. And I've failed them by letting you control everything. That ends tonight." Footsteps creaked above them. Emily and Daniel had woken, drawn by the raised voices. Emily peeked around the corner of the stairs, clutching the railing. "Dad?" she whispered. Richard turned, his chest tightening at the sight of her fear. He opened his arms, and she rushed down, burying her face against him. Daniel followed slowly, one hand pressed against his ribs, his eyes wary but hopeful. Vanessa's voice sharpened. "Go back upstairs, both of you." "No," Richard said firmly, pulling Emily closer. "They're staying here." Daniel lifted his chin, his voice steady despite the tremor in it. "We're not scared of you anymore." The room fell into a tense silence. Vanessa's face darkened, her usual composure unraveling. She stepped forward, but Richard blocked her path. "You've had control long enough," he said, his tone low and resolute. "Not anymore. I'm calling a lawyer. This marriage is over." Vanessa's eyes blazed. "You'd throw everything away for their lies." "They're not lies," Richard shot back. "They're my children's lives. And I'll protect them this time, no matter what it costs me." For a moment, the storm in Vanessa's eyes threatened to break. But instead of lashing out, she grabbed her glass of wine, her voice dripping with disdain. "Fine. If that's how you want it, don't expect me to make it easy." Richard didn't flinch. "I don't care if it's easy. I care that they're safe." Emily's arms tightened around him, her tears soaking into his shirt. Daniel's lips pressed into a hard line, but for the first time, Richard saw a spark in his son's eyes. Relief, maybe even hope. That night, as Vanessa stormed upstairs, Richard sat on the couch with both children at his side. His hands shook, but he knew there was no turning back. The choice had been made, and for the first time it was the right one. The weeks that followed felt like stepping into a different life. Papers were filed, lawyers called, and the silence that once suffocated the house began to lift. Vanessa's voice, once sharp and controlling, grew distant as Richard moved forward with divorce proceedings. She no longer carried the same power in her words. Emily sat at the kitchen table one afternoon, crayons scattered around her, as she drew a bright sun above two stick figures holding hands. Daniel leaned against the counter, his ribs still tender but healing. Their laughter was quiet at first, hesitant, like a bird testing its wings. Richard walked in holding a stack of documents. He looked older, more tired, but there was a steadiness in his eyes that hadn't been there before. "It's official," he said softly. "The court granted me custody. You'll both be staying with me." Emily dropped her crayon, her eyes wide. "For real? She can't hurt us anymore." He crouched beside her, pulling her into his arms. "For real. She won't be here again." Daniel's shoulders eased, the tightness that had weighed on him for months loosening at last. "It's over," he whispered, almost like he didn't believe it. Richard looked at both of them, guilt flickering across his face. "I should have seen it sooner. I should have protected you from the start." Emily shook her head firmly. "You believe us now." "That's what matters." The days slowly settled into a new rhythm. CPS checked in regularly, ensuring safety and stability. Therapy sessions began, where Emily and Daniel spoke cautiously at first, their words like fragile threads slowly weaving into strength. Emily even brought her diary once, her pages serving not just as evidence but as a map of her courage. At night, Richard tucked them in, something he hadn't done consistently in years. One evening, Emily looked up at him and whispered, "I don't feel invisible anymore." He kissed her forehead, his voice thick with emotion. "You'll never be invisible again." Daniel, lying across the room, added quietly, "It feels like we can breathe." Seasons changed. The trees outside shifted from green to gold, and the air grew crisp with autumn. In the yard, Emily and Daniel kicked a ball back and forth, their laughter ringing out, no longer muted by fear. Neighbors noticed too. Mrs. Ramirez smiled as she saw them playing again, relief softening her kind eyes. Those scars lingered, moments of fear that returned in dreams, sudden flinches when doors slammed. There was healing too. Emily began to write new stories in her diary, not just of pain, but of resilience. She filled the pages with hopes for the future, with pictures of bright houses and smiling faces. One evening, as the family sat together on the porch, Daniel leaned back and looked at the sky streaked with orange and purple. "Do you think we'll ever forget?" he asked. Emily answered first. "I don't want to forget. If we forget, it's like saying it didn't matter. But it did. It made us stronger." Richard's eyes filled with tears, but pride shone through. "She's right. What you both went through, it doesn't define you, but it has made you braver than anyone I know." Emily smiled, the weight on her chest finally lifting. For the first time, she believed her voice had power. Power to protect, power to heal, power to change the course of their lives. As the night settled in, Richard wrapped an arm around each of them. "We're a team now, and nothing will break us again." Emily leaned against him, Daniel on the other side, and for the first time in a long while, the house felt like home. Before we close this story, don't forget to subscribe for more powerful journeys of resilience and hope. And make sure to click the video suggested on your screen. It's another story you won't want to miss.